So thank you, first of all, welcome. Thanks for your time today, everybody. We understand the programme team is making quite a lot of asks of you at the moment in terms of your time. So we'll try and make the best use of this session. The session is to introduce you to the working draft of the programme plan that's now being consulted on. And this is a working draft. We expect it to change quite a lot as it's developed through the consultation period. And of course, our aim is to baseline a programme plan for MHHS by the end of the year. And this is important because as it stands at the moment, we don't yet have an overall plan that validates the official existing timetable for delivering the programme. So before we get into the session in detail, I just want to run a video, a message from Rachel Clark at Ofgem, who's our programme sponsor. This is where the technicals get a bit interesting. Kate, you might want us to go off camera, I suppose, when we get the video started. How are we doing this?
Should be fine. I think Danielle's going to bring it up.
This is the first playback session, so might be a few teething troubles.
We've got no sound at the moment, Keith.
Yeah, we need to start this. You just need to share the sound.
Is the sound not playing?
No. You have to do it for you to share on the top.
Let me.
Hello.
How about now?
I'm Rachel Clark,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
at Ofgem with response.
It's gone.
Gone again now, yeah.
Danielle, you need to take yourself off mute.
Okay.
Hello. I'm Rachel Clark, and I'm Deputy Director at Ofgem with responsibility for retail systems and processes. I have been ultimately accountable for the implementation of the switching programme, which has now gone live, and I'm the Ofgem programme sponsor for market-wide half-hourly settlement. I want to take a moment to reflect on the importance of the market-wide half-hourly settlement programme and why we are keen to see it implemented as soon as is practically possible. MHHS is a vital step on the way to increasing the flexibility of the electricity system so that we can decarbonise the energy sector in the most cost-efficient way. As such, it provides an essential underpinning of our ability to meet the UK's net zero commitment. And the more efficient use of the energy system that MHHS will facilitate will help to keep the costs of energy down for all consumers. This is more important than ever before at a time when consumers and businesses are facing unprecedented electricity costs. This is why Ofgem considers it imperative that the industry should ensure that implementation of MHHS is done as quickly as possible. When we introduced obligations on all market participants to act in accordance with the transition timetable that we established in April last year, we wanted to be clear that we expect all market participants to prioritise implementation of MHHS in such a way that they can support a swift implementation. We cannot afford this programme to be held back because some parties do not appreciate the urgency for implementation. As was envisaged, the programme is now carrying out a full plan review to establish a detailed, robust, credible and achievable plan for MHHS implementation. Ofgem supports this plan review. It is essential that the programme has a considered, evidenced and robust plan that all parties can believe in and operate in accordance with. It is also essential that this plan, when finalised, delivers the quickest achievable route to implementation. In support of that, I have asked MHHSP to press all of you on what the minimum timescales are for activities and to look for all possible ways of minimising the time to go live without jeopardising the fundamental requirement for a robust, credible and achievable plan. We expect all programme participants to apply the necessary resources and the necessary priority to implementing MHHS so that this important change can be delivered as soon as possible and start delivering the expected consumer and market benefits. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this critical programme.
Good stuff we got there in the end. Okay, right. So coming back from the sponsor video to the agenda in hand. So we'll go through this agenda today. There will be time for Q&A at the end. So if you could please hold your questions, the reason being that we may well answer quite a lot of the questions as we get through the pack. If you could hold your questions, we'll have a session at least 20 minutes at the end to cover any Q&A. And if there are residual questions we don't get a chance to answer in the session, you can email them to the PMO mailbox and we'll answer them there. So, and also this deck that I'm presenting is the one that was provided to you on Monday. So I'm just going to talk through some of the aspects and bring that to life a little bit. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So what we'll do is we'll start with an introduction to the objectives of the planning exercise, the consultation process, and the principles that we're following in developing the plan. So on the next slide, it's just what we basically set out in the document. As I say, that it's the deck we provided to you on Monday. Next slide. Okay. So to reinforce what Rachel said in the video, and this is our starting point, we want to fully consult with you on the plan, assess ways to ensure the plan sees the implementation as early as possible, and preferably no later than the existing timetable. And importantly, to form a baseline programme plan that can be approved by Ofgem on the weight of agreement from all programme participants that the plan is credible, robust, achievable, and also measurable. So we want to do that by working with you guys, working with all of industry to develop the plan. We don't want the programme team to be imposing a plan on you. And as you know, we've been involved with a number of volunteers from programme participants in the last 3 months to try to knock the rough edges off the plan and have something for round one consultation that is more recognisable and understandable. So the plan as it is so far is just a working plan. It's a draft based on the information available to us when we drafted it. It's not been approved by Ofgem, and it is imperative to challenge and validate all the assumptions in the draft with the aim of getting this earliest date. So in a way, we've done a left to right planning exercise, which is what we always agreed we would do and we promised we would do. But this round one is about a bit of a right to left challenge on the plan and trying to bring it into a timeline and a convincing way of delivering that can balance all stakeholders' expectations of when the go live date will be. So the review process is designed to do this. We look forward to working with you on that. The point of the programme is that we're not delivering benefits through the programme. We're enabling benefits to be delivered by industry subsequently. So this plan and the delivery of it is to allow the generation of the benefits that will be realised as a result of the delivery. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about the consultation process itself. So we've actually provided quite a lot of questions to you, probably more than you're expecting to see. But it's quite important to point out that round one of consultation is actually the place where you need to put in the effort and where you can really make a difference in influencing the plan. We've put a lot of questions in. Some of them are yes and no questions, followed by more thinking that's required. But it is really important to get round one engaged with you properly, getting high quality inputs from you, and actually your chance to influence the overall structure and activity durations and sequencing is round one. We're not focusing on absolute dates in round one because we need to get basically everybody playing on the same pitch. Round two is about them working out what game we're playing on the pitch, if you like. So absolutely what I would say to you all is please put the effort into answering the questions that are in the consultation document as much as you can in the next 4 weeks. This is your opportunity to tell us what you think and to get what's essentially a good detailed plan that we can use to start round two, because round two then will be polishing and refining the plan. round 3, which is subject to approval by PA on the 10th of August, but we're assuming that is going to happen, is really just the final check and a by exception check. Really, by the end of round 2, the plan should be done, and round 3 is just a very short period of just final checks before it goes to Ofgem or PSG hopefully recommend it to Ofgem for approval. So this period of the next 4 weeks of round 1 consultation for me is the most critical time, and we would appreciate you spending the time. We know that you're looking at the design at the same time, but really, if you don't get with the programme and get with the plan in the next 4 weeks, you're probably going to be playing catch up from that point onwards. Enough on that. If we move on to the next slide, you've seen this slide probably in a number of different meetings. We just wanted to remind you about the principles we're following, and really just to look at the principle at the bottom, which is industry shaped. So to what I've just saying, you know, we want to work with you to come up with a credible plan that has the right evidence, and actually we want to have the justification for it. So if we can work with you guys in industry to get that plan in the right place, to get the pitch shaped out in the right way, and then we can engage all our stakeholders before round 2 to ensure that we go into round 2 in a fairly aligned way across the whole programme and all of the stakeholders at that point. So that principle about industry shaping of the plan is one that we're completely committed to, but we actually need you to kind of step up, if you like, in relation to that. On the next slide, which is the next section, I'm sure that for most people planning terminology is pretty familiar, but to ensure that we're all starting from the same point, I will briefly cover this topic. Control points, these are quite important elements of the plan. So they provide the demarcation between the key phases of the programme. So, for example, between design, build, test and integration testing and the other phases. And each control point, there's actually a decision to be made. It's not a checkpoint only. It's actually a decision about whether to stop the programme, to pause it, or to proceed. So essentially, at that point, we're asking about the health of the programme, and a separate control point review will be held, chaired by the programme director, and conducted before the relevant PSG to sign off on the next programme phase. And it will assess things like the amount of change and risk that the programme is carrying, the suitability of the forward plan, participant readiness, and so on. And we'll also use the control points to refresh the delivery and change strategies and assess progress towards achieving the documented programme outcome. So it's quite a heavy piece of work that we do within the programme, and we'll want to give you sight of as we lead up to those decision points and control points. Milestones themselves are more familiar, and they provide focus to the key delivery activities, and they're an important point of control on programme delivery progress in any case. In our working draft of the plan, in the Milestone Register, we've indicated the milestones currently identified. We've not gone into great detail about the descriptions. We want you to focus on the milestones, the tier at which they are governed, and the dependencies between milestones. For round 1, that's the main thing. And in round 2, we'll find those more fully in the Milestone Register. If we look at the next slide. On critical path and critical threads, well, a key question for these is the path to where. So the critical path is basically the overall path to go live, whereas critical threads are the paths to between control points, essentially, which mark the end of the current phase and the start of the next one. So in both cases, we just need to identify what activities, if delayed, would directly impact the destination point on that path. And those activities will be the primary and active programmes, delivery and management going forward. So the concept of control points and critical threads was introduced into faster switching. We want to build on that in MHHS, and if you like, make it a pretty heavy but necessary way of building confidence that we are in fact ready to move into the next stage, and to give people an opportunity to voice any concerns they have that can influence that decision making. And for readiness assessments, they'll support the control points, but they'll also support other key points in the programme's delivery. They will provide an important top-down check on participants' readiness and on progress, but also it will work together with our bottom-up assurance activities on the programme, because from an SI perspective, we'll be assuring participants' readiness for and their progress in DBT activities. So we've got that basic assurance bottom-up and the readiness assessments top-down, and we're using a fairly tried and trusted process for readiness assessments, but we will seek to balance the weight of the questionnaires against the value of seeking the information so that you have internal governance to go through in providing those replies. So our plan hopefully provides sufficient time, but also the actual questionnaires themselves need to be balanced, and that's what we're seeking to do. The next slide, please. So very briefly, I want to go through the main artifacts. I'm sure you're pretty aware of them, but I just want to make sure that you're completely familiar and comfortable with what they are. There are a number of them. Not all of them are coming out in round one for very good reasons. So we have essentially plan on a page, the format which you're familiar with, and you can't really look at plan on page without looking at the RAID information. So for round one, to make it simpler, we've combined the plans on pages with the related summary RAID information to make sense of those plans on pages. So that's one document that you have. Then you have the program plan, or rather the schedule, and that's been provided as an Excel document, which hopefully is easy to navigate. We also have provided the Milestone Register, which, as I said just now, is mainly focused on the key milestone titles, the tier at which they will be governed, and the dependencies between the milestones. And to support those artifacts as well, we have the DPMO, which is now launched in the portal, so you can interrogate wider RAID logs and so on. What I would say is the RAID log we provided for round one consultation is RAID in relation to the plan and planning, whereas of course if you go into DPMO, you can look at the RAID and the wider program context and just provide that, get that understanding context if you need it. So basically we're providing artifacts 1 and 6 as a combined form, and we've also provided artifacts 2 and 3, and then artifacts 4, 5, and 7 will be provided in round 2 for obvious reasons. Okay, next slide, please. Let's go into a little bit of, I talked about the kind of the levels or tiers. So let's look at the planning hierarchy, and this is about how the plan is going to be governed, linked to forums and decision making. So we previously, through the planning working group and other forums, articulated the way we're going to run the governance of the milestone levels. So we have basically tiers. We call them tiers because levels will start to confuse with the terminology elsewhere in the program for levels. So for the planning itself, we have milestones which are either at tier 1, 2, or 3, and essentially tier 1 are the big blockbuster milestones. They're the ones that affect the critical path and so on. Tier 2 tend to be more critical thread milestones, and other ones which need to be managed relatively carefully, and then so on. So those are you can see that one. I don't need to go into great detail. It's probably more important to show the next slide, which is the way in which they map to the governance organization. So tier 1 is basically managed at program steering group, and should there be a need for escalation, escalated to Ofgem if there are changes to milestones, and of course Ofgem are an attendee in the program steering group in any case, so they're cited on whatever the PSG is cited on, even if it's not being escalated. So those are the tier 1 milestones in our milestone register that you have possession of, and then tiers 2 and 3 are managed at the advisory group level. That's essentially the way we've set the program up. Okay, next slide, please. This is a pretty boring slide, actually. just to let you know how we've named the milestones, just so you can interpret them in the milestone register. But basically, that gives you a sense of the tier that the milestone is being governed at, and then the work stream of activity it relates to, and then there's a regime of numbering subsequently. Not really particularly interesting, but just so you know. Okay, we can move on. Right, now we get into an overview of the plan itself, and as I say, it's a working draft. So what this should tell us and tell you is how we're approaching the delivery of this program. What are the main obstacles, the potential obstacles, and the uncertainties we see at this point? And to remind you, for round 1, this is a high-level document to get your views on structure, sequencing of activities and durations, and to test assumptions and risks. And round 2 will be focused more on the absolute dates. So if we go into the next slide, please. So this is the overall plan on the page, and the eagle-eyed among you may realise that this slide is slightly different from the one we published on Monday. We're just replacing the slide in the document on the collaboration base and the website, just to be clear about the critical path. Nothing else has changed on this slide, but this is the overall plan on the page. And the plan, as we know, the replan starts from M5, but it acknowledges and it accommodates the early activities that participants either have been doing or need to start, things like high-level impact assessments and procurement activities and so on. We understand that some participants will be further forward in that respect than others, but if you like, this is the worst case scenario that we're showing in this plan. And we've accommodated two types of parties: those that will go through SIT and those that will not go through SIT. And we'll cover later on about when that decision would be made. But obviously the paths through the programme are different depending on which parties go through SIT. Of course, central parties who are outlined separately on this plan do need to go SIT, and central parties are, the DIP provider, Elexon Central Services, DCC, the LDSOs, and Electrolink. We've set out the assumed.
Sorry, Keith, just to interrupt, the LDSOs aren't central parties, but they will be necessary in SIT.
Sorry, I should say
Yeah.
the ones providing central capabilities.
Yeah.
You're
Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Kate, just to be clear on that one. Yes, so we've set out the assumed timelines for participants DBT, and that's been based on a range of feedback we had from volunteers in the planning working group. We recognise there are one or two parties that probably say they can do it more quickly or significantly longer, but we believe this is probably the best interpolation between those data points at this stage, and we'll hear from you through consultation what you think about that. But basically, we've taken the back-end DBT off the critical path, essentially, so the consequentially impacted systems that are not directly interfaced with the MHHS but affected by the changes in the settlement operations also need to be gone through DBT in participants' organisations. But this plan actually allows for a longer duration of those and articulates them separately, which will make it easier for you then to respond about what you think about the plan in that respect. And Kate will talk a little bit more about some of these things in detail in subsequent slides. We have outlined when the qualification testing may start, and this is covered again in more detail by Kate later, but it just to say it starts when key parts of SIT are complete, but it starts before all of SIT is complete. And then migration and go live at this stage is based on assumptions about how this will happen. We'll talk about it again in more detail, but we acknowledge the assumptions we've used for the plan at this stage are probably highly arguable, and there's some further conversation that needs to be had, including with Ofgem, to get a more alignment on the preferred way in which migration and go live will actually happen. So there's probably quite a lot of assumption in that area at the moment that needs to be dealt with during the timescale of round one and before we get into the round two plan. I don't know, Kate, if there's anything else you want to say about this particular slide.
Yeah, I might actually use this one to go into a bit more detail rather than some of the detailed ones, because I think it's quite handy to have it all on the page.
As you wish. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, all right. So what I was going to do was just go into a little bit more of the thinking behind some of the durations here and the way that we've put the critical path and the dependencies and so on. So, oh, sorry, you're just going to have to live with that for a minute, and I'm not going to go and turn it off. So the reason that we split it up into SIT participants and non-SIT, I think is fairly straightforward, as Keith said, and we've shown central systems separately as well. And then we've got everything coming together in the cutover and migration. And what we should have, looking at this again, is we should have the red critical path from the central systems going up into the all participants cutover and migration, so that it ends up as a single line where it says critical path, and leading up to the final cutover to the new settlement timetable. So we'll put that in when we upload it. What we've done has been a lot informed by the planning working group sessions that we've had. And if we start from the left on this slide, we've got a 5-month period where you can finish off doing the impact assessments, because I think most of you have already started that, where you will be in possession of the design and you can do your planning. And what we've done is, in the lower level detail, we've broken that down into a detailed plan for the immediate few months, and then a high level plan for the rest of the program, and also to do some procurements should you need to be changing some of your service providers. Now, what we've got is we've got the critical path coming down into starting DBT partway through that, and the reason for that is that in the planning working groups we were talking to people about having 3 to 4 months to do the planning before getting into DBT, and then the tail end on that, i.e. planning and procurement, is to do with finishing off procurement activities and so on. So that's why it comes down to part way through. And then in the, if you look at the SIT swim lane at the top, we've got a 12-month period where there's design, build and test, and what we would call PIT, and you would probably call user acceptance test internally, is towards the end of that. We've got, it looks like there's a gap there on that swim lane. That shouldn't really be a gap, because it goes straight into SIT. One of the things that we're going to be doing in that period, and which we haven't represented on here, just to kind of keep it fairly high level, is we are going to be providing you with some testing tools. And by that, I don't mean test management tools, I mean some stubs that you will be able to use, which will hopefully help your testing. And the things that we'll be providing are a piece of software which will simulate interactions with the DIP. Now, quite how extensive that is, we're still defining it, but you will certainly have something that if you're developing, for example, a data service, it will allow you to simulate your interaction as a data service with Elexon central systems via the DIP. So in other words, the interaction with LSS and the interaction with MDS, sorry. We may provide something to simulate the industry standing data. We're not sure yet. The other thing that we'll provide is a way of generating bulk quantities of consumption data, and that would be consumption data of the form that could be used again by a data service, either by a smart data service and then in a slightly different form for advanced data services. We didn't originally intended to do something in the unmetered space, but having investigated that a bit further, it seems that there's really no value in that. So we're going to be doing that for smart and advanced. And then we come on to, if you're following down the critical path, we come on to SIT in the top swim lane. And we've estimated the length of SIT, leaning on experience of previous programs, mainly on faster switching. And this is something that we do need to do a bit more due diligence on during this consultation period to try to measure up in a better way than we have so far the size and complexity of this compared with faster switching, from which we took some of the timings. And also thinking a bit about the way that we're doing the testing, because we are intending to use more automation, because here again we're going to provide some different testing tools which will enable us to easily and quickly evaluate results produced by the data services, for example. So we need to do a bit more due diligence on that.
Kate, just to say, one of the things that we all of us need to think about is how we might accelerate SIT. For example, if we put more resources in than we otherwise would expect, would that be a way of shortening it? So some of the challenges around durations also as I think probably Rachel also implied in a video, if there's a way of putting more resource in to do things more quickly, then those sorts of things need to be looked at as well.
Yeah, and just to be clear about the scope of SIT, what we're looking to do here is we will do end-to-end testing in the sense that it validates the end-to-end MHHS design. We're not doing end-to-end testing in the sense of end-to-end from the supplier systems viewpoint. So we're not at all intending that you should have done your billing changes, your sales changes, your customer correspondence changes and things like that at this point. What we will want for SIT is enough there that we can fully exercise the MHHS design and prove that it works. So what we'll want there is we'll want the data services. From a supplier's point of view, we'll want the market interfaces. We'll obviously want the metering services, and then all of the central systems and the LDSOs, certainly the registration systems, the registration services. And I think, it would make sense that we have the network operations and the UMSOs as well at the same time. So the critical path in SIT, oh gosh, I'm sorry about this. I'm just looking at this and it looks like the dog leg needs to go down a bit further along. So it needs to go down into the sandbox, because at a certain point in SIT, we will say to the SIT participants, okay, guys, there's enough testing being done. We think that the design has been sufficiently validated. Your systems have been shown that they're sufficiently robust, and we will then open up the end-to-end sandbox for you to do testing. So that's initially for the SIT participants to do testing in. And I think that's an important point, because I know, particularly for you guys as a constituency, I know you will want to do a lot of testing to test all of your processes, everything that you've got, your whole estate, and you want to do that in a rigorous way, which will take some time. So getting into that sandbox as early as possible, I'm sure, is an important point for you. And I've also just realized that I'm not on camera either, so I will stop being rude and put myself on camera. Right. And then I'll just finish off on the SIT participants, and then I'll come to the non-SIT. And then again, at a certain point through end-to-end sandbox, things will drop into preparing for the advanced and unmetered cutover to live. And then that will trace down to the advanced and unmetered cutover to live, and the start of what we've put in as a 13-month migration period for that. So if you look then at the non-SIT participants, the beginning part is the same, and we've split into market interfaces and the services that are necessary. So the metering services, data services, registration, and so on. And we've kind of artificially put in a 14-month period for the interfaces and services. That could be longer, and it could overlap with back-end systems. Doesn't really matter. It's just the way we've represented it. But overall, what it gives us is it gives us a longer period while SIT is going on for the non-SIT participants to actually carry out all their preparatory work. And then that drops into qualification. And qualification has also got a kind of a timing dependency on SIT, because we are not going to start qualification until we are sufficiently far through SIT that we think everything is robust, everything's working. It's pointless opening up to, dozens of people to qualify when the system's not working. So the things that we will have outstanding in SIT are things like operational testing of the DIP, for example, and probably also some non-functional testing. So qualification, then we've got going on for 12 months. 11.9, this is all generated automatically by a package, so apologies for the slightly odd numbers on this. 12 months qualification. Now here again, this is a big piece where we really need to do some more due diligence. And again, you know, following Keith's lead, you need to think hard about how this could possibly be brought in. So we're in discussions with the BSc PAB, and we need to open discussions with the other codes, particularly about qualification and about how that all meshes together. So there are a lot of open questions around qualification at the moment, and we need to make some progress on them in the next few weeks to get a firmer idea for the plan. And then end-to-end sandbox opens up slightly after qualification for those non-SIT participants, because you have to qualify or do SIT before you get into the sandbox, and then that runs on. Now, obviously, the sandbox and qualification environments are enduring environments. I haven't shown them running on because we want to show the sort of periods that we are looking at people operating within to meet the timeline of this program. But they are enduring environments, and if we have new entrants into the market, they will come on, you know, at some point later on, and so on. And then you've got the same path into live. Now, and central systems I won't say much about, because you've got the DBT participation in SIT, prepared to cut over to live, and then they go live. In our plan, they go live slightly before the advanced and unmetered cutover, just to give a month's breathing space to let anything settle down that needs to. I mean, it's possible that some of the central systems will go live before this, and the functionality will simply not be used for some time, and that's absolutely fine as well. But we've said that the last one of these will go live a month before the advanced and unmetered cutover. So what we've said on migration, and this, as Keith said, this is one of the slightly controversial points, is this: we've respected the Ofgem timetable and the transition timetable and the CCTG guidelines, in that we've said advanced and unmetered go live earlier than smart, non-smart. The way in which we've differed from the Ofgem timetable is that we've said that each segment, all the participants in each segment go live at the same time for that segment. Now, I think this is highly likely to change, but the reason that we've done that is because there are so many questions outstanding on this topic at the moment. This is the only way that's really consistent with the design as it stands, and doesn't give us a lot of issues around the beginning of migration. So the fundamental issue is that if we did what was shown in the Ofgem timetable and allowed, and was also in the CCTG recommendations, and allowed a period of 3 to 4 months where suppliers could come on live, it could go live anytime in that period, ending in M14, by which all suppliers had to be live and able to accept new MPANs on the new arrangements. If we had that period without any ability to reverse migrate, in other words, once an MPAN has moved on to the new arrangements, switching to a supplier that's not yet on the new arrangements and therefore moving back to the old arrangements. Without that ability, Ofgem's very concerned about the restriction to consumer choice during that period. So that's a hot topic under debate at the moment, and we can't really preempt, we can't say which way it will go. So what we've done is we've taken a solution which works. It doesn't cause Ofgem concerns about consumer choice restriction, and but it allows that you've got advanced and unmetered first, and then smart a little bit after. Now, we are looking on the programme at possibilities for how we can do a reverse migration, which will mean that we will be able to reinstate that 3 to 4 month period where early adopters can go live, and if you know, and that provides an incentive for people to actually get live early. So that's what we've got at the moment. Right. Okay, next slide, I think, Danielle. So what we've got on this particular one, this is just a little bit more detail on the system design, build and test phase of the programme, and you can see the critical thread running through it, that you've got M5, and then you've got people doing their impact assessments and planning, and then the procurement carries on, but then they go on to do DBT and prepare for SIT, and the critical thing is that the SIT preparation is complete before the control point. The DBT, the control, there's a little bit of a timing thing with control points. So if you look at the actual durations in the plan, the control points happen slightly before the end of the month, and the DBT will carry on to the end of the month, but it's important that the programme takes the decision in enough time to allow preparation for the next phase to start, and therefore the control points will happen slightly before the real end of that phase. And at the end of that phase, everything will be ready to go into SIT. So Danielle, do you want to go down? So just looking at some of these points, I'm just looking at the delivery approach. I think there's probably not much more to say there other than it is really important that you have a very hard look at the delivery and see whether that DBT period can be brought back at all so that SIT can start earlier. So looking now at the key issues, the transition design or transition stroke migration, what I think within the programme, transition and migration, the terminology is not quite set as it should be, and we're getting there. But transition, according to the CCDG recommendations, is the period from now until the new settlement arrangements kick in. And migration is the period where MPANs are being actively migrated over. So this is really about the design of the migration and how MPANs get moved across. So that design, I think it's understood generally what's happening there, and that needs to be crystallized, and that will be done as quickly as possible. And as I said, the thing about potentially looking at what it would take to do a reverse migration is also being looked at as well. Key assumptions. I think you all understand this, that PIT is for you guys to do. You do it. You execute it. The SI will do a certain amount of assurance of PIT. So the kind of the parameters there are that we will assure all participants in SIT and we'll actively track their progress because obviously we want to make sure that SIT can start on time. Now, one thing that I should mention, and I don't think it's highlighted in any of these slides, is that in terms of the decision point on participation in SIT, because we've got planning on your part going on until end of February on this plan of 2023, what we're looking at for a decision point on whether you participate in SIT or not is happening slightly after that. So we figure that once you've done your plans, you'll be in a position to say, yes, actually, you know, we can get our development done in time to participate in SIT in the areas which we need to develop, and we would like to participate in SIT. Now, we do appreciate we've got work to do to lay down conditions of participation and assurances that it's equivalent to qualification and all sorts of things like that. But so what we're doing is, between you looking at your plans and us firming up on what's needed, we will be looking to do the SIT participation SIT participation decisions around the end of Q1, beginning of Q2 next year. In terms of the assurance we do, as I said, we assure all of the SIT participants, and of the remainder who are going to go through the qualification route, we assure a certain percentage. I think it's about 10%, something like that. So that's in terms of actually looking at the plans, looking at the execution that you've done and things like that. Now, obviously, there's a gateway that you need to pass before going into qualification, and getting that tick in the box to start qualification is given by the PAB, not by us. It's we are still smoothing out roles and responsibilities between ourselves and the code bodies, but as things stand at the moment, the qualification is essentially run by the BSc PAB, although we have a hand in defining what needs to be done. But the actual mechanics, the management, the tick in the box to get into qualification, the tick in the box to get out of qualification, that's all from the PAB, with obviously other code bodies involved, because it's not all going to be BSc PAB. Yeah, and then I think there's just some other assumptions that are necessary there. Risks. We do need to take a bit of a checkpoint after a few months to see once you've done your planning to look at how long you now think your design, build and test is going to take. So that's an important point at which to verify that everything is still on track according to what we've planned. And the rest, I think, you know, yeah, you can read those for yourselves. Okay, Danielle, do you want to move on? Okay, so here, yeah, not very much to say on this one. You've got execution of SIT, and at the end of this, SIT will still be going on, but because qualification will be starting, as we showed on the overall POAP, the qualification starts at a certain point in SIT. We've said that the integration testing phase is up until qualification starts. So in the beginning of the qualification phase, there will be a bit of residual SIT going on. You can, if you look at the detailed plan, you'll be able to see the different stages in SIT and how they stack up and the dependencies between them. You can't see it at this level, but if you look at the full Excel, then you'll be able to see that. Do you want to move on, Danielle? So I will just pick out the issues, the assumptions and the risks, I think. Sit on the critical path. We are validating it. Please validate it also. We need to firm up on volunteers for SIT, and that will be done in the timeline that I've suggested. Assumptions. We've assumed that SIT is voluntary. We very much hope that we can provide sufficient incentives in terms of getting on early into the sandbox, getting on early into live for SIT participants, that that we'll get enough participants.
I think it's fair to say that we've had already one or two organisations that have suggested they might be keen to
May
join.
be interested, absolutely. Yeah.
So there's some good signs as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that's particularly important to say to this community is we really, really need some of you to participate in SIT. Unless we have at least one of the large suppliers, and preferably two, then I think, you know, the credibility of SIT is really diminished. So if any of you are thinking of potentially that you might want to come into SIT, you know, we're very happy to have direct discussions with you to find out, you know, what the blockers are and what might persuade you. So that's a really important thing.
And we have asked that specific information in the consultation questions. For example, what might be needed in order for you to want to join SIT and so on. So we have kind of majored on that in the consultation questions. So hopefully you'll be able to give us some feedback on that subject through that mechanism.
And I think, you know, from what I understand, our sorting out of the migration approach will be an incentive such that, excuse me, such that you can get to go live early. So we fully intend to sort that out. Okay, Danielle, go ahead. Okay, so qualification. I mean, again, at this level, not too much to see. We've got, you can see SIT carrying on a bit and qualification going on. Now we've got back-end systems DBT going on as long as qualification. I mean, in practice, obviously it's got to stop a bit before qualification, but again, it's a bit artificial for us to say, oh, you know, you've got to stop a month before qualification or 2 months. We don't really know at this point how long qualification will take for a given participant. We've been given indications that it could be between 2 and 6 months. That's obviously a big range. So we're trying to work on that at the moment. And there are various questions, and I should really give a plug at this point for the qualification working group, the first one of which will be held next Tuesday. So if you are interested in participating, and I would really love as many participants as possible, please mail the PMO and they will give you the attendance details. So that's next Tuesday. I can't remember the time. There's lots of questions over qualification. If, for example, is it a qualification or is it a requalification is one of the big ones that we need to answer initially. And then what's the scope and so on. And I will talk a little bit about the scope. So what we've assumed so far, and again, you know, this is one of the reasons for standing up the qualification working group now, because we really need to get to the bottom of this with you. What we've assumed now is that there'll be essentially 3 bits to qualification if you go just the qualification route. What we haven't yet worked out is how this fits in with SIT participation, but we'll come to that. So if you go the qualification route, it will be, first of all, there will be some things that you will need to have done in PIT that will need to be evidenced or asserted or whatever. in terms of some testing, possibly some procedural stuff. Sorry, in PIT, I think I might have said SIP, that you will need to have done. So that's the first thing, and that's what the PAB will be checking in order to give you the green light to go into qualification testing. So what we will do now, I know that qualification, BSc qualification as it stands is a relatively procedural thing, but because this is such a big change, we want to institute an actual testing phase in a bit similar to the UEPT in faster switching or indeed in smart metering. So first of all, PIT, and then you get a tick in the box for certain things, and then you can drop into the testing. You can do that testing on the UIT environment. And, you know, again, a la faster switching, you'll be given data, you'll be given a slot and so on. We haven't worked out how that all works, but it will be worked out. And you do some testing. You pass those tests, and then there's a third component which wasn't operational on faster switching, but which we're keen to do, is to have some measure of the robustness of back-end systems and the processes that they underpin. And so we will be asking for something, and again, we don't know the form, but it may well be, you know, you could do some testing on the UIT environment in the sandbox, or you could do some testing on the standalone and provide some evidence to show that your systems in an end-to-end sense are actually able to support market-wide half-hourly settlement. So that's just a flavour, and that's where things are. So over to the qualification working group to get further down on delving into the detail of that. Okay, Danielle, do you want to go ahead?
You've got about 10 minutes more, Kate, before we...
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I think that's fine, actually. I think it shouldn't be too long. I'm just looking at, yeah, I think we've probably covered most of these things. Yeah, so qualification.
Just a quick one, Kate, on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
It does talk about Elexon being accountable for the management of testing, but you know, we are going to include the qualification that might be required under SEC and under the REC for the affected parties for those qualification processes as well. Yes,
absolutely. So we've been talking to the Elexon BSc. We've yet to talk to SEC and REC about qualification specifically. So that's another thing that we're going to do over the next few weeks. And, you know, appreciating that there are some roles within this whole ecosystem which do not get qualified by the BSc. Okay, go down, Danielle. Right, migration. I mean, again, yeah, so we've got two lines, one going down here to the milestones about going live with smart and non-smart, and then another one going down to the final milestone, which is it's actually the penultimate milestone. It's the transition is complete, and then if you look at the overall POAP, there's one further milestone, which is then the cut over to the new settlement timetable. And I think what we on the transition timetable, it was the two were coincident, whereas we've put a bit of a gap between them to allow for any preparatory work to happen after the transition's been completed to then actually bring the new settlement timetable into action. Go down, Danielle. So key issues, migration, watch this space, essentially. Key assumptions, talking about the reverse migration. And yeah, some mainly other things that I've already mentioned. And then the key risks, again, it's mostly around the outstanding questions on migration. And I think that's actually probably about it. Danielle, is that the last slide? Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Kate.
So Keith, back to you, I think.
Yeah, it is. And there was one last slide just to remind people that for those that need it, there's a glossary that's been on the portal for some time, and I still find it quite helpful. So other people may also. That is the end of the deck, and I think you can see that we're being honest with you about the things that we still need to sort out. And actually, through round one consultation and your responses to our questions, you'll actually help us by informing your views on some of these topics that Kate's outlined are subjects of our due diligence to try to remove the level of ambiguity in the current plan. The alternative would have been to sort this stuff out early, first, and then engage with you guys. But we're learning lessons from before. We want to build the plan with you. We don't want to be getting ahead of you and telling you what we think the plan has to be. And therefore, we would appreciate you kind of taking it as we've laid it out, which is honestly saying, we've got these areas of work that we are leading on to try and dispel those uncertainties. Your feedback on round one will help us with information. For example, sit duration, it's not just about what we think, but it's about what you think. For migration and go live, same thing. It's important what you think. So all of this stuff we felt was the best way to engage you early and have that as part of a joint enterprise to get the plan sorted out. And from what I've heard from participants I've spoken with, I think that's probably what you guys probably believe is the best approach as well. So yes, there's a lot of ambiguity in the plan in round one, but round one's where we sort a lot of that stuff out and give ourselves a really much better plan with a clear timeline and dates that we can polish and refine through round two. So that is the end of our kind of telling you what we think and trying to explain things. We did offer the opportunity now for people to ask any questions that we haven't answered, and we're happy to spend up to the next 25 minutes if you want it to ask questions by raising hands, and we'll just take them in the order in which we received them. The reason we're not using Slido is because we felt that probably having given you all this stuff, you've probably got to go away and think about a lot of these things. If there are particularly exceptional questions you want to raise at this stage, that would be helpful. And Martin's set the race going.
Set the race going indeed. No, it's just a question for Kate really, and we've discussed it, but for clarity for everyone else, I think it'd be worth saying that though the testing stops in the plan, the test environments are still available to the program participants, because they'll need, if there are any issues found in migration or anything, they will need to be there in an enduring manner. It doesn't affect the plan, it just does affect how people react to it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Martin. Yeah.
Thanks.
We might have shocked people into submission, or we might have answered all the questions. I suspect people are probably worried about the 57 other questions they've got to kind of get answers to. But Graham.
Graham, go for it. Can't hear you very well.
Sorry, again. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, you're never going to get a meeting without me asking the questions. So I was just waiting for my supplier friends to go first, but seeing they're all a bit shy, I thought I'd go on. It's just a generic one, Kate, and I know this will probably come out in your sort of sorting out the ambiguity in the next phase. When you were talking earlier on about the timetable for understanding a bit more about SIT volunteers, and I think you mentioned something end of Q1, Q2 next year. I suppose I'm just trying to get my head around, we get hopefully to the end of the year, we get a plan that's approved, we start the gun going for beginning next year into the new plan. If we suddenly then collectively have to think, perhaps you've not got the number of volunteers that you wanted to, or you get the volunteers but they drop out, and then it's like, okay, what do we do? Do we need to go down the pointing a few fingers at people and say, right, you guys need to come on board from a mandatory perspective? If parties have always from the end of this year then make their decision as to what they're going to do within qualification versus SIT, to then reverse people around and say, sorry guys, you now have to come on board, will be really problematic, put to those individuals onto the plan. I know it's not an easy thing to sort out, but I think it's just putting it out there now.
Yeah,
well,
no, absolutely.
just Kate, just to point out, Graham, that those specific risks are identified in the RAID pack, the POAP and RAID pack. We absolutely were very conscious of those risks, and we've given some general indication about how we might seek to manage them, but we would also like to get parties' feedback on how you think we might manage those risks. But the risks are there, they're documented, and any ideas about how we might mitigate them would be helpful in terms of formulating the round 2 plan. So yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So
I think
what I would say, oh, sorry, let me, I'll be quick, Jason, and then I'll let you come in.
You go, Kate.
What I would say also, Graham, is, you just reiterate what I said earlier about talk to us, because we really, when I say we're crystallizing it end of Q1, early Q2, something like that, that will be crystallizing it finally. But between now and then, we want to be talking to you, and we want really to get good indications from people as soon as possible, whether you intend to participate or not, so that we're kind of tuning it, and that there shouldn't hopefully be any shocks. Sorry, Jason, was that what you were going to say?
Exactly the same point.
Yeah.
If we get to March, April next year and we don't have a very good idea of who might be participating, then we won't have done our job on the way. But we will. You're quite right, Graham. We will have to look at the contingency measures for any potential mandatory participation if we do get to that situation. It's got to be part of the risk management.
If I could correct my colleagues slightly, rather than talking about the dates, we're talking about the time taken between M5 and when we need to make these decisions. So durations is what we're focused on in round 1. Yeah. Don't get obsessed about Q1, Q2 or whatever. Just talk about how far after M5 can these things happen.
Yeah. Sorry. So it's sort of towards the end of your planning stage.
Yeah. Okay.
It'll be iterative as we. Well, it'll be iterative as we go, won't it? This will hopefully be a constructive, ongoing dialogue.
I hope so. Chris, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of goes along with Kate's point. In terms of any questions or feedback that we've got during the consultation period, how do you want us to manage those? I think when we were in the replan, you said that process might continue, but I can't see that in the diary. So is that going to be where we can feed that in, or is it going to be a different session?
I had neglected to mention that, so thanks for reminding me, Chris. So we always said to the planning working group and the volunteers that we would re-engage them as we accept the consultation feedback from parties and start reiterating the plan ready for round 2. So they're not in the diary, but they will go into the diary. And also I would say that the volunteer process is open to other volunteers to join us, as long as they are delivery people, program or project managers. Then we would be more than happy if people want to be more on the inside track for this. We can take on more volunteers in the planning working group. The door has always been open to that. So I think it's really important. Otherwise, we don't retain collective ownership of the planning process and the plan itself. We don't want to spin you off and then bring you back in later. So we just felt that it wasn't really necessary or actually helpful to engage you until the feedback starts coming in and we understand what it is, and we can then thematically present it to the volunteers and have some conversations. So absolutely, so Lewis, we probably just need to take a note to schedule in those planning working group sessions and remind people that the volunteers are welcome.
There will likely be a little bit of a hiatus, though, right, Keith? But for a couple of weeks while you're away and I'm away.
Well, but in any case, there's no point in reconvening the volunteers until we've had most of the feedback in round 1 and we start working out how we might reiterate the plan. There's no point in coming into the group and saying, well, what do you think about this then? I think we have to form a little bit of a view about what it might mean and what options the volunteers might want to consider in terms of the way the plan might get developed, so we can provide a bit of a framework around the conversation. I don't want to waste people's time until we've got to that point. So yeah, you and I actually are both, and a lot of people are away in the August period, but actually it fits quite nicely that we bring the volunteers back together probably at the end of the month, those that are available, and any further volunteers that wish to put their heads above the parapet at this stage to really understand what's going on. We don't want this to be a black box exercise. We want it to be completely clear and actually hopefully you're inside the box when we do this. When we go out round 2, we want a weight of opinion already that recognises what the plan looks like and actually has a certain amount of at least tacit support for it, even if there's still things to be sorted out. Round 2 is all about polishing and refining. The real risk is that we can't start round 2 on time because we haven't done sufficient due diligence and we haven't got sufficient information from you in round 1 to enable us to evidence a timeline which all stakeholders need to be comfortable with. And I need the backup in order to deal with all stakeholders to convince them of the legitimacy of any timeline which isn't in line with the timetable that currently exists.
I would say to people, don't wait for 2 weeks if you've got questions early in the process, though. Do send them in, because myself, Giles, Adrian, there's a lot of cover here whilst Kate and Keith are away. So do make sure if you've got questions and you want some feedback or input, just get into a dialogue, ping it in, and we'll address your questions as much as we can.
So the PMO mailbox is what we've said. So
Yep.
if you put them there, they'll get farmed out to the right people in the team, those that aren't on holiday.
Now I'm back now, Keith. So
Yeah, I know.
done mine early. Done mine early.
That's the problem with having your holidays early.
Right, are there any other questions? I'll say we may have beaten you into submission, or we may have answered quite a few of them. Of course, you haven't really had a chance to, consume the artifacts we've sent. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Not really a question in relation to any of the artifacts that have been released, but I'm just wondering, do we have an activity in the plan at some point to review the central industry costs? Because obviously it looks as if the delivery is going to take much longer than anticipated, and so we're anticipating that will increase the industry costs associated with delivering these changes.
Yeah, well, it may take longer than the timetable. We haven't established that yet, but of course there will be a change request on the back of the plan, which will require everybody to impact assess against the proposed plan before it goes to PSG, and PSG recommend it to Ofgem for approval. So there will be that normal opportunity for central parties to tell us their impact.
Okay, so we expect that to be received as part of the change request then.
Yeah, so the idea is that the third round of consultation, should PSG agree we have the third round, that ends in mid-November. And if we've managed all stakeholders, including Ofgem, to that point, it should be relatively quick to hold, if necessary, an extraordinary PSG, get it recommended to Ofgem, and at least this side of Christmas, it will be with Ofgem for approval. Whether it is approved at that point is up to Ofgem, but hopefully we can de-risk that process a little bit by ensuring that Ofgem are properly aligned and engaged all through the process, so that they understand and recognise what the plan is and they're accepting of the evidence that backs it up.
The change request pro forma includes impact on costs, impact on contracts, all the things that you'd expect, Stephen.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Adam.
Hi there, Keith. Just a quickie from me. So to make sure I understand the plan is set out, when you look at the non-set swim lane, you still also illustrate the phasing of market interfaces and back-end systems from a DBT perspective. Presumably that's just illustrative in that particular block, and actually the driver is just be ready for qualification.
Yeah, exactly. So
Cool.
So in some senses, Adam, we shouldn't have put it in like that, but we just wanted to make them equivalent. So it's a bit arbitrary, that cutting it between the two. Yeah.
That's fine, thank you.
Yeah.
It's a bit like some of the discussions we've had in the planning workshops, Adam, where you said we've said we're not constraining people's methodologies or approaches to development. A number of you are doing product-based development, most of you are doing agile development. That's not constrained by what we're putting in the plan.
Thank you.
And I think, as Kate said, we kind of suggested a sequence. So it probably isn't sequenced. There's probably overlaps in some way. And actually, the duration of SIT is quite important to determine, because it does dictate how much the critical path, or how long the critical path is for participants on non-SIT to get their DBT back-end DBT done. Because if SIT were to be pulled forward, then that would reduce the window so as to avoid those activities not being on the critical path. So we just have to be aware of the fact that there can be an impact where pulling SIT in will have an impact on that as well.
Sure. And then from an entry into qualification test perspective, I think you've called out previously that you might tranche that, given you'll potentially have a lot of parties trying to access that phase. So when would you have clarity in terms of, when would parties have clarity in terms of when within that phase they would enter qualification?
So I think one of the things that the qualification working group has got to do is come up with a bit of a plan on when they're going to answer all the big questions, and that's one of them. So right now I couldn't say, Adam, I'm afraid. I think we've got to kind of work through that with the qualification working group.
Okay.
What we do need to have is a better view of it before round 2 starts, and therefore conversations with the BSc team, for example, are probably going to be primarily the way in which we get a better understanding about the constraints.
So I guess what we've been thinking is that we try and sort things out between ourselves and BSc and the other code bodies. I hadn't particularly thought to try and answer the tranching question that quickly, to be honest. I'm sure we will do some kind of tranching, but how we will do that, and whether we'll do it a bit like faster switching and mandate that this category of participant goes at this point, I really don't know.
One of the big influences, Kate, will be how long it takes an individual party to get through qualification, because if it is indeed at the outlier end of what you'd mentioned earlier, if it was indeed 6 months per participant and the window is only 12 months, then it does influence the legitimacy of tranching. And we have to think about those things.
When I think, when we talk about 6 months for qualification, that's not necessarily qualification testing. So I think it's important to draw the distinction, because qualification is much wider. There's a lot of procedural element to that. Whereas, it may be that, I think we were looking at what happened on faster switching, and I think we said that typically participants took 3 to 4 months to do the testing needed for that, for the UEPT. I need to look at that again, but it was something like that. But that the tranches overlapped a bit and so on. So what
we would say is the round 2 plan won't be devoid of assumptions. It will still have assumptions in it. It's just that for round 2, we need to make a stab at what we think the realistic assumption is, and they need to be a lot less arguable assumptions than we have at the moment. So, the intention, it's a progressive process. Even when we baseline this plan, there's going to be areas of uncertainty or assumptions that are made which might turn out to be incorrect, and there may need to be changes. That's just the way planning is, right?
Yeah, sure. That's helpful. Thank you.
Something that I was just thinking about, something that would actually help us, Adam, is if you've got particular constraints, like you don't have to explain what's behind your question, but for example, if you're thinking, okay, we've got a lot of development to do, and it would be convenient to us to hit qualification in the second half of the 12 months. If you've got constraints like that, then this is the time to voice them, because knowing things like that can help us when we decide how we're going to tranche.
My question right now doesn't come from a point of any constraints. It's just to understand the 2 paths to qualifying our systems, really.
Fine. Okay, fine.
But there are consultation questions that address that topic of tranching, and there are questions like that where if you do a good level of thinking about it and provide us with as much thinking as you can give us through answering those questions, it will just help us, settle in on less arguable assumptions for round 2. And as we go through round 2, even, we may still be working on some of those assumptions and trying to make them even more accurate before we get to a point at the end of round 2 of having declared what the plan now looks like. So, we're setting ourselves some targets, but it's, as long as we are progressing and we're making the plan more realistic and we've backed it up with proper evidence as to why the plan looks like that, then we should be in a good place by the end of the process.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Anybody else before we close? Okay.
Can I just ask, has that been a useful introduction, guys? Has that helped to set the context?
Yes, it really has. Yeah, and now we just need to take everything away and digest, I think.
Okay, good.
I think also from my point of view, so I wasn't involved in faster switching last time around. So even just the kind of basic bit that you went through there, just explaining what all the terms are, was really helpful for me. So appreciate that other people are a bit more kind of advanced in the industry change than me, but certainly that was a useful refresher for me.
Thank you. That's
Right.
really good. Because this is the first session. We put you on first because we know you're really important, guys. But we've got to do quite a few more of these. So hopefully we'll sort out the technical hitches and we'll try and learn lessons and make all these sessions useful. But it really is over to you guys now. And I think we've made the point very strongly that we're only going to be as good as the input you give us. So please do try to find the time. I know it's difficult, but this is the time. It'll be too late otherwise to influence this process. So thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
I'll let you know.
many thanks.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers, then, bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
bye.